Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. The Scopes monkey trial, when the teaching of evolution was called to the stand here in Tennessee, feels like a thing of the past. But even as this summer marks a full century between us and that epic courtroom drama that pits science versus religion, the debate is alive and well. The town of Dayton is marking this 100th anniversary next month with an updated production of a play they put on about the trial. There's also a symposium, and coming up later this hour, we will get an on-the-ground report from Dayton, which has a complex relationship with this bit of history. But right now, we're having our own radio symposium on Scopes, complete with dramatic readings, so stay tuned, from our not-ready-for-drive-time radio actors. And to start, we begin with our own high school science teacher, like John Scopes, who taught evolution as part of his classes as an instructor at Hume Fogg and before that Hillsborough and Hillwood High Schools. Wesley Roberts is a Nashville native and an advocate for education. And truth be told, he pitched us this show idea. So thank you for getting us to talk about Scopes, and welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you very much.
Well, rather than science, let us start with the history here, that in 1925, the Tennessee legislature passes the Butler Act, which makes it illegal for public schools to teach, quote, any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man is descended from a lower order of animals, end quote. So what was going on at the time that would lead them to pass such a law?
At that time in 1925, there had been a big push for modernism, and modernism was changing a lot of the philosophy in the United States. It specifically allowed for questioning of a literal interpretation of the Bible. When John Washington Butler found out about this, and because he felt like parents should be able to say what was being taught in schools since they were paying the taxes, then he introduced the Butler Act.
I see. So Butler, it was here in Tennessee.
That's correct. He was a representative from Lafayette, Tennessee, but came to Nashville, and in the 1925 legislature, he introduced this bill. Okay,
so he introduces the bill, it passes, and then I guess you have all of these teachers who have to decide what to do next. Were teachers really teaching evolution, and was John Scopes in Dayton really the only one who wouldn't stop?
The Tennessee Textbook Commission had approved a textbook that had a chapter on evolution, and it was very heavily into evolutionary theory. So when Butler found out about that, then he was very upset about that.
I see. Well, so the main lawyers here, when this, so Scopes ends up on trial. The main lawyers were pretty famous men already. Clarence Darrow defending Scopes, and William Jennings Bryan, who was on the state side prosecuting. Why were they chosen?
They were chosen because the Scopes trial was basically a show trial. It was, the people in Dayton like to call it a setup, that there was a man named George Rapelier who was working in the mining industry in Dayton, Tennessee. And when he saw that the Butler Act had passed and that the ACLU had put advertisements in Tennessee newspapers looking for a teacher who was willing to go on trial to test the Butler Act, George Rapelier saw that, took it to some of the leaders in the community, and on a Saturday morning in May, they sent for John Scopes and asked him if he would be willing to be that teacher. So he had been playing tennis. He's got a towel around his neck. He's got a tennis racket over his shoulder, and he says, okay, sure, why not? And they went forward with that. Scopes really had no idea that it was going to be a national incident.
24 years old, right?
24 years old. It was his first year of teaching. He had come from University of Kentucky. And he was very popular in the town. The people liked him. There was no animosity. He was never arrested. He agreed to do this show trial, and it just ballooned after that. So Clarence Darrow was chosen mostly by Scopes and by the American Civil Liberties Union. And William Jennings Bryan volunteered to do it because he felt like fundamentalism needed to be protected.
Yeah. Well, what was the atmosphere in Dayton like at the time?
It turned into a giant carnival.
Yeah.
There were street corner preachers. There were so many street corner preachers that they had to make a schedule for the four corners of the courthouse lawn.
Wow.
There were lots and lots of monkeys that were brought to Dayton, and chimpanzees. And
For the show.
For the show, that's
Oh,
right.
wow.
I was able to talk to one of the women in Dayton who was a little girl at the trial. Her name was Frances Gabbard, and she was Effie Robinson's granddaughter. His daughter. I asked her back in the early 90s, what do you remember about the trial? And she said, I really don't remember anything, but I remember the monkeys, and the monkeys were everywhere.
Oh, I'm
and she
sure as a
loved that.
child.
Yeah.
Wow. So I want to talk about some of the most dramatic moments in the trial because, okay. Well, actually, now that I guess we're doing this. We've had some folks barge in, and I think they must have left their seersucker suits at home, but they've got their headphones on and they're ready here. Would you mind introducing yourselves as we get into the dramatic part of this segment?
Hello, I am Clarence Darrow.
I am William Jennings Bryan.
Mr. Roberts, would you tell us where we're going to in the trial, this dramatic reenactment?
Yes. The trial was about 6 days of arguing procedure. The jury was excluded from most of this. So the guys who were going to be on the jury, they really got excluded and they missed out on so much. But the judge also said that the defense witnesses could not testify. Now, the defense had brought a lot of evolutionary scientists in to testify, and the judge ruled that their testimony would be irrelevant. So Darrow decided that the only option he had was to get an expert on the Bible, which would be William Jennings Bryan. And on the next to the last day of the trial, he called him to the witness stand to testify as an expert on the Bible.
All right.
Do you believe that Joshua made the sun stand still?
I believe what the Bible says. I accept the Bible, absolutely.
Do you believe at the time that the sun went around the earth?
No, I believe that the earth goes around the sun.
Well, have you ever pondered what would have happened to the earth if it had stood still?
No, the God I believe in could have taken care of that, Mr. Darrow.
And so you think that if they had Moses and the prophets, they don't have to find out anything else?
I have all the information I want to live and die by.
When was that flood? Around 4004 BC?
That has been the estimate of a man that is accepted today. I would not say it is accurate.
But what do you think that the Bible itself says? Don't you know how it was arrived at?
I never made a calculation.
A calculation from what?
I could not say.
What do you think?
Well, I do not think about things I don't think about.
Do you think about things that you do think about?
Well, sometimes.
Do you have any idea how old the earth is?
No.
The Bible you have introduced as evidence tells you, doesn't it?
I don't think it does, Mr. Darrow.
Well, it says 4004 BC.
That is Bishop Ussher's calculation.
Would you say that the earth was only 4,000 years old?
No, I think it is much older than that.
Do you think that the earth was made in 6 days?
Not 6 days of 24 hours.
Now, as Attorney General of this state, I object. What is the purpose of this examination?
The purpose is to cast ridicule on everybody who believes in the Bible.
We have the purpose of preventing bigots and ignoramuses from controlling the education of the United States, and that is all.
Well done. Well, those of us who are in the studio, thank you. We'll see out the not ready for drive time radio acting company. Thank you for joining us. All right, so I hope our listeners enjoyed that, and if you didn't, I'm glad you hung with us. So, Wesley Roberts, what was Darrow trying to do when he called Bryan to the stand like that?
He was mostly trying to get Brian, to admit that a literal interpretation of the Bible is impossible.
Yeah. I caught that. So Scopes ended up being found guilty of breaking that law, but did it really matter?
It mattered only that Darrow wanted to take the case to the Tennessee Supreme Court.
Well, let's bring in Dr. Antonis Rokas. I told you I wasn't going to say Antonis, and I did. Antonis Rokas into the conversation. He's here, an expert in evolution. He's the Cornelius Vanderbilt Chair of Biological Science and the founding director of the Evolutionary Studies Initiative at Vanderbilt. Welcome to This is Nashville.
Great to be here.
On a fun day. So when we talk about teaching evolution, what do we mean teaching evolution?
Yeah, so evolution is really the overarching framework of biology. There is a well-known saying among the scientists that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. If you want a definition, we can define evolution as descent with inherited modification. And that definition encompasses everything from small-scale evolution, so how, say, a particular trait or variant changes in a population from one generation to the next, all the way to, evolution at much grander scales. So say the evolution of birds or the evolution of fish and how that took place.
And it's that grander scale, I guess, where you really get to these huge questions of where we all came from.
That is correct. I think one curious aspect about evolutionary theory is that everybody thinks they understand it.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks that they have a sense. And there are a lot of misunderstandings or misconceptions that surround evolution, and that's what sometimes gets the science and the theory in trouble.
Yeah. Well, so much of this obviously is kind of evolution versus creationism. Is the theory of evolution necessarily at odds with creationism? Do you have to sort of object to one to believe the other?
Well, I think right. So there is this misconception out there that evolution and religion are incompatible.
Yeah.
And I think that's incorrect. There are definitely many scientists that are religious, and there are definitely many people of faith that accept science, including the science of evolution. As usual, right, in some of these controversies, the discussion or the terms of the debate are established by those at the extremes.
Yeah.
And so you have scientists on the one hand who think that, there is scientific evidence for the absence of God, which, takes the study of natural phenomena to the study of beliefs, which is not the case. And then on the other hand, you have fundamentalists, right? So people who interpret the Bible or their religious textbooks literally. And, sometimes they have statements that are at odds with science and at odds with what we know about nature.
Yeah. Wesley? Right?
Yes. One thing that I always liked to do in the classroom was to begin with writing on the whiteboard a scale of 1 to 10, and then asking students on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being non-evolution and 10 being evolution, where does your evolutionary thinking lie? And that helped them to understand that it's not an extreme. You don't have to pick one or the other. One of the questions I used to get was, Mr. Roberts, do you believe in God or evolution? And I'd say, do I have to make a choice?
Yeah.
So after they are able to pick a number and then place it on the board and explain what their beliefs are, then I think they're a lot more comfortable with the whole concept.
Yeah. So Vanderbilt's been honoring the Scopes trial, I think, kind of since the beginning of the year. And next month there's a celebration with an academic symposium for a couple of days. Speakers on the Scopes trial, history of creationism, evolution education. So, Dr. Rokas, why is this bit of history still important today? And who's the symposium for?
Yeah, I think, if you look back, I think there are several issues that came at the forefront with the Scopes trial. One is, as we mentioned, the relationship between science and religion. Another is the role of experts in a society and how we use them. The third one is who controls public school curricula. And, all these issues are still relevant today. Yeah. And so we thought, both in our university, in our campus, and in our community, and then more generally, in the United States and in our country, that as a top institution in the country, and as being lucky to be at the place where the Scopes trial happened, that it was our responsibility and honor to to explore these issues and what has happened. And what's nice about Vanderbilt is within a stone's throw you have access to all the experts. So we have my colleagues, the law professors, my colleagues in the divinity school, my colleagues in the Peabody School of Education, and then obviously those of us in biomedicine and biological sciences.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville. I'm your host, Blake Farmer, and we're digging into the Scopes monkey trial throughout the hour, and there's much more to come. But Wesley Roberts, let's dig back into the history for just a moment before we go to break. The trial in Dayton was not the end of the case, or certainly the drama for Dayton. What happened to those attorneys who we just had actors portraying them in here? But I know William Jennings Bryan died like within a matter of days.
Yes, he did. For 5 days after the trial, he went around in the Mid-South area, and he was doing a lot of tent revivals, Chautauqua meetings. He came back to Dayton and on a Saturday night, went to church Sunday, went to the place where he had been staying, had lunch, went upstairs, lay down to go to sleep, and died. And that was a very sad time for the people of Dayton because they had mostly been supporting him. And in his honor, they built Bryan College, which is still operating in Dayton, Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, he was really seen as kind of the hero, at least locally.
He was until the time that we just read, when he said that he didn't think the earth was made in 6 days of 24 hours. He lost so much credibility. In fact, many people said that that was the low point for him and that he died of a broken heart as a result of that.
That he felt like he had not defended the views of 7-day creation.
And fundamentalism, that's correct,
yeah,
yes.
Wow. Well, we have much more to get to this hour, but need to take a quick break. When we return, producer Mary Mancini takes us to the courthouse in Dayton and finds more open minds, but continued reverence. So stay with us.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org. Funding for This Is Nashville comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. "100 years ago, John Scopes committed the crime of teaching evolution in a Dayton, Tennessee high school. A few months later, he's tried and convicted. To mark the centennial, the town will hold a special celebration of this historical event. But the tension between evolution and creationism is very much a present-day debate. WPLN's Mary Mancini reports from Dayton.
While reporting on the Scopes trial in 1925, a journalist nicknamed Dayton, Tennessee, Monkey Town. 35 years later, Inherit the Wind portrayed the people of Dayton as overzealous Bible thumpers prone to marching in the streets with pitchforks and torches. Neither are accurate. Both stuck.
It was nothing like Inherit the Wind. One of us has got to say it.
That's Tom Davis, vice president of the Ray County Heritage Preservation Foundation. The smell of fresh cut grass is in the air when I meet Tom on the sidewalk in front of the courthouse. On either side of the footpath that leads to the entrance are two bronze statues. On the left is fundamentalist Christian champion and Scopes prosecutor William Jennings Bryan. He is solemn in a crisp morning jacket and vest. Two of his more famous quotes are carved on the left and right side of the base, and his achievements are listed on the front. Presidential nominee, Secretary of State, congressman, Christian, statesman, author, orator. On the right is a jacketless Clarence Darrow wearing a rumpled shirt and suspenders. His brow is furrowed, his mouth open as if mid-sentence, and he points a finger at Bryan across the lawn. His pedestal simply reads, Clarence Darrow, attorney for the defense. We make our way to the Scopes Trial Museum in the basement of the courthouse. I've come here to learn the real story, and the museum delivers the goods. It's bright and neat with large photos of the main players next to text panels explaining the events, and some nifty artifacts.
The typewriter that the court reporter typed the transcript, a press pass signed by John Scopes, William Jennings Bryan, and Clarence Darrow, and we have a monkey doll, sheet music.
Monkey business down in Tennessee.
In 1925, the Tennessee state legislature passed the Butler Act, which made it illegal to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation, and instead teach that man descended from a lower order of animals. It was 4 years before the stock market crash of 1929, but Dayton was already in its own depression. George Rapelier, manager of the once booming Cumberland Coal and Iron, was looking for a way to bring some investment to the town. The ACLU, meanwhile, put an ad in the paper looking for a defendant to challenge the Butler Act and to take it all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court.
George Rapelier saw the announcement from the American Civil Liberties Union, said, why don't we do it here?
Rapelier's idea caught on with the other town leaders. They just had to find a defendant. So they summoned John Scopes. Scopes said, if you can prove I taught it, I'll be your defendant. Once Darrow and Bryan got involved, it became an international sensation.
Over the course of the trial, telegraphers transmitted some 2 million words from Dayton. WGN Radio leased phone lines at a cost of something like $1,000 a day to broadcast the proceedings.
On the third floor of the courthouse is the recently renovated courtroom. The courtroom. As if on cue, a man in a seersucker suit, straw hat, and orange bow tie walks in. It's Rick Dye, president of the Preservation Foundation. It's the foundation who, for 36 years, has put on their own dramatic production instead of Inherit the Wind. This year, Rick plays Clarence Darrow. He obliges when I ask him to get in character.
If today you can take a thing like evolution and make it a crime to teach it in the public schools, tomorrow you can make it a crime to teach it in the private schools or in the church. Today the public schools, tomorrow the private. Here we find as bold and as brazen an attempt to destroy learning as was ever made in the Middle Ages. The only difference is we've not provided that they be burned at the stake. But there's time for that, Your Honor. We must approach these things gradually.
Like I said, they've got a few more finishing touches to do.
Ultimately, the jury convicted Scopes, and the judge gave him the minimum fine of $100. The case eventually made it to the Tennessee Supreme Court, where they overturned the conviction on a technicality. The Butler Act was repealed in 1967.
Remember the wisdom of Solomon in the book of Proverbs. He that troubleth his own house shall inherit the wind.
The significance of the trial and subsequent Supreme Court case cannot be overstated. But how have the people of Dayton felt about it all these years?
In a master's thesis from 1959, I think it was, the student interviewed a bunch of folk who were involved with the trial. One of them said, it didn't take us 90 days to realize we'd made the biggest mistake of our lives, because Mencken called this the monkey trial, called Dayton Monkey Town, and that stuck. And that hurt.
When Tom arrived almost 50 years later, they still considered it a blight on the community. Dayton native Vicki Kelly was embarrassed by the nickname.
My dad used to always say, I'm from Monkey Town. I'd be like, Daddy, don't say that.
These days, the people of Dayton seem much more engaged and interested in what happened in their quiet town all those years ago.
Hi.
Mike Wilkie sits behind the counter at Down Home Outdoor Addiction, a firearms and hunting supply store on the main drag downtown.
It's an important part of the Dayton history. It's a pretty important event, and it's in this little town.
Religion is a topic we're told to avoid at dinner parties. And while some choose to wade in every now and then, Daytonians have been having this conversation in their homes, schools, and churches for 100 years. And they have their answers ready.
Do you have a personal opinion about creationism versus evolution?
Born and raised here. Obviously, I believe we came from Christ and we were created from God, but everyone's open to their own beliefs, and just because you think differently about something. That doesn't have any reason why we can't just agree and continue to live on, exist.
Well, I am a very strong creationist, but I do not believe that you should ever hide any kind of understanding about the nature of creation from anyone, and let good education help people make their decisions.
I'm a creationist, and I think that all of the science points to creation. But I'm not going to hate on people who don't agree with me.
For This Is Nashville, I'm Mary Mancini.
Mary, thank you for that reporting. An important trip to Dayton. But we're back from Dayton and in the studio with former Metro School science teacher Wesley Roberts and Dr. Antonis Rokas of Vanderbilt's Evolutionary Studies Initiative. Thanks for hanging with us. So creationism certainly alive and well, not just in Dayton. The polling suggests between 1 in 6 and 1 in 3 Americans would consider themselves creationists, and I would imagine that in Tennessee it's more on the 1 in 3 side of things. But I'm also thinking that there's probably nuance there that, if I polled members of my church, they'd probably call themselves creationists if they had to, but also not deny evolution being a big part of the story. So later in the hour, we'll take your calls about this very thing. What were you taught about evolution? Go ahead and get in line if you've got something to say, 615-760-2000. But Dr. Rokas, how do you handle folks who want to kind of believe that there's some truth in both things and hold those in tension?
Yeah, I think, right, it depends on, how much of a role you see for a creator.
Yeah.
So there are certainly there are people who are deeply religious and who believe in a creator of the world. And then, they accept, different parts of evolutionary theory. So very often, my research is on microbes. I generally don't encounter folks that doubt that microbial evolution is occurring.
Yeah.
Or that a bug, when you give it a drug, that, it can evolve resistance to a particular drug. Actually, we can see it in the laboratory in a matter of days. So there are folks that accept that, but then they, typically where they draw the line is human evolution.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Who made us.
So ultimately, to go back to the history here, the Butler Act that kicked this whole thing off was repealed in 1967, like Mary said. But that didn't really settle anything, because then there was I think it was called the Genesis Bill in 1973. So we're talking like 6 years later. Then there was a lot of talk about intelligent design over some decades. A textbook that was well known, I think, called Of Pandas and People comes out, late 80s. Basically an intelligent design textbook, as I understand it. So Wesley Roberts, you, let's see, would you have been teaching then? Probably not yet, but how did Metro Schools handle all of that?
Well, I was teaching. And in 1967, I was in 6th grade, and I do have to give a shout out to my teacher, Miss Qualls, who came in the day that the legislation was repealed and drew a timeline on the board about evolution.
Wow.
So I was really, that was one of my first formal introductions into it.
You're saying when the Butler Act was repealed,
correct,
she comes in and for the first time introduces the concept.
That's right, in my 6th grade class. I was a senior at Overton High School in 1973 when the Genesis Bill came out, and we talked about it a little bit, and the consensus was, how do you teach 2 chapters of Genesis versus all of the stuff on evolution and give them equal time? So that wasn't really one that we worried about too much, and it was overturned by a lawsuit from the Americans United for the separation of church and state 2 years later.
Well, and then in 1996, you had what was called the Fact Not Theory Bill. And we actually have a couple of news reports, one NBC, ABC, News Channel 5, featuring the sponsors of the 1996 Fact Not Theory Bill. Let's take a quick listen.
A controversial bill by Senator Tommy Burke sets new guidelines for teaching the origins of man.
All that it does is what it states, the one line, that the teachers in the schools would teach it as theory, not as fact.
Representative Zane Whitson and many Christian fundamentalists believe evolution contradicts a literal reading of the Bible, the idea that humans were created in the image of God. So Whitson has introduced a bill which would order teachers in all grades to label evolution as a theory or guess or face dismissal.
This will help children to be able to make up their own minds about creation.
With this bill, are you trying to bring religion into the classroom?
Well, I would not deny that.
Dr. Rokas, I'm interested in this focus on the fact not theory concept. Can you help me sort that out from your vantage point?
Yes, of course. So this is one of the most common misconceptions of the theory of evolution. And it stems really from a mix-up between the casual use of the word theory, right? I have a theory that my favorite team will win tomorrow's game, type of thing, because we have this player who is really good, from the scientific use of the word theory. And so in everyday language, right, theory means a hunch. There is very little evidence supporting it. Scientific theories are really broad explanations for a wide range of phenomena. And the acid test that we put theories into is facts and experiments and data. And so we continuously test our theories. And actually, the most important training you get as a scientist is to learn how to disprove your theories. Right, you want, more often than not, you make headlines by disproving something that's popular or well accepted, because that's how you move forward, you make discoveries, you find new things.
But are people working to disprove the theory of evolution? You don't hear a lot about that.
So you have folks that continuously test evolution. And so evolution has become one of these theories, like the theory of general relativity or the theory of gravity, where the evidence is so overwhelming. So if you think about, there is evidence from fossils, there is evidence for DNA, right? The DNA of a bacterium, we can take a human gene, the gene that makes insulin, and put it into a bacterium or a yeast and make human insulin. I mean, isn't that amazing? How else can you explain that without sort of invoking that there is common ancestry, that life on this planet shares a common origin?
So the proposal we were talking about, fact not theory, in 96 is voted down. Then in 2011, you had the Teach the Controversy and something called the Divisive Concepts Law. We also have a quick clip from a 2011 committee with a scientist who was called to testify, Dr. Miller, and State Representative John DeBerry, another Democrat.
Let's consider quickly two theories that are accepted by almost all scientists. One is atomic theory, and the other is evolution. I can't imagine that this legislative body would take time to debate whether or not there's atoms are made up of protons and neutrons. That's not a controversial scientific theory, and neither is evolution.
First of all, you put two things in front of us. You put the atom in front of us, you put evolution in front of us. It don't take a rocket scientist to know that you're talking about an exact science and you're talking about something that is a theory. I take offense with people coming into this committee and presenting your opinion, which is as good as my opinion, as though just because you have prefixes and suffixes on your name that all of a sudden you are some type of standard.
That clip there from 2011 in a committee hearing with State Representative John DeBerry, who now I believe works in the cabinet of Governor Bill Lee. So the Teach the Controversy legislation did pass and went into law, though Governor Bill Haslam at the time chose not to sign it, saying that it didn't really change anything. Wesley Roberts, where are we right now in Tennessee? Can you teach evolution straight from a textbook?
Yes, you can. I think that probably a really good practice for teachers now is to first teach that law, to teach the controversy law itself.
How does one do that?
By having the students read the law and then discuss, what does this mean?
I see.
How are we going to deal with this? And I think that that's a very effective way to do that. And just to clarify, John DeBerry is the senior advisor to Governor Bill Lee at this point.
Yeah. So did this law include something about intelligent design, God-based creation? Is that part of the instruction as well, or what does it mean to teach the controversy?
They very carefully excluded the language of intelligent design from that law. And in 2008, that law had been tested in what was called the Dover Panda trial. So that's based on the textbook Of Pandas and People, which was being used in Pennsylvania in biology classes. Judge John Jones said that it was intelligent design is not science and therefore doesn't belong in the classroom. So they just keep trying to exclude that.
Yeah, it might make sense to go a little bit back and sort of review the history of major trials. So in 1968, in the Epperson versus Arkansas case, the Supreme Court ruled that the teaching of evolution was constitutional, right? So the ban.
Hence why the Butler Act was repealed at the time. Okay.
Exactly. And then we go to, so then the strategy by creationists becomes, let's call it creation science and try to put it in the curricula. And so that leads us to 1987 with the Edwards versus Aguillard, another Supreme Court decision, United States Supreme Court decision concerning the constitutionality of teaching creationism. So it was deemed to be unconstitutional because it wasn't science. And so around 87, 88, you see creationists pivoting to call it not creationism, but a different name. So they start calling it intelligent design. They remove the word creator, right? So there is an appearance of design in the universe and in life, but who that designer is, we're not told. And that leads to the Of Pandas and People book, where you can go through the different editions of the book. And around the late 1980s, you see a substitution of the term. It was really a search and replace in a word file, presumably, of finding the word creationism and replacing it with the word intelligent design, which I think reveals what their strategy was.
Yeah. What were you taught when you were in school? And I'm talking to you, the listener. We'd love to hear from you here in this last segment. So give us a call. Let us know what you taught, especially if you were in Tennessee schools. 615-760-2000 is the number, 615-760-2000. Go ahead and call. We're going to go to a break, but we are opening the phone lines. So when we come back, we'll hear from you. We'll also hear from one of Wesley Roberts' former students who had a sort of creation to evolution conversion. Stay with us.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for prep and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. We're back. And we are focused on the Scopes monkey trial at 100 years old. Nothing about that century-old debate is settled in the minds of many. But what were you taught in Tennessee schools? We have time for a few calls, and they're coming in, and we'll jump in here quickly. 615-760-2000. Last time, I'm going to give that number so you know. But I want to welcome to our radio symposium on Scopes, Sophie Badgett. She was one of Wesley Roberts' students at Hume Fogg. Welcome, Sophie.
Hi, thank you so much.
So you grew up in a conservative, faith-based community in Tennessee, not too far from here, and school and church teachings included creationism. Then moved to Nashville with your mom, started as a freshman at Hume Fogg. Do you recall your first exposure to being taught evolution?
I do. I was in Mr. Roberts' class, and he drew this line across the board.
Is this the line he was referring to earlier?
This is the line he was referring to. And I remember feeling so deeply conflicted to put my mark on the line, because it felt like I understand what you're teaching and that feels correct. I also have these like deeply embedded beliefs in me. So it feels like if I put my line too far to evolution, then it feels like I'm committing some sort of fatal sin.
Yeah. Well, so where did you put your number?
I remember putting my number probably halfway between the mid-mark and the evolution line.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so, I guess you learn more. You're listening, obviously. You've got such a dynamic teacher here sitting over next to us. But how did your family respond to what I guess they saw and you saw as an evolving view of human origins?
Yeah, I don't think that I necessarily thought it was something that I was going to go home and talk about.
Yeah.
And that was a really cool shift that I had as the years went on, of getting to have those conversations. Like, it felt commonplace to start having conversations that maybe felt more taboo in the earlier years of my life.
Yeah. Well, we're taking phone calls in this segment, and we'll go straight to the phones now and hear, what you were taught in schools like Sophie. So let's go to Amy in Dixon. You're on This Is Nashville.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
So my children went to school here in Tennessee, and I didn't go to school here until high school. So I learned evolution, and they were learning the theory of creationism and intelligent design and everything. They were very confused.
In a public school?
So, well, somewhat more from their friends and
Okay.
also in the classroom, and they're like, well, what exactly is evolution? Because I'm hearing different things. And I said, well, think of when you were created. You existed in my womb, and you had all these things encoded into you. But the environment you were growing in is what determined how you formed, how long you were in, what gene expression happened, all those things. If you just apply that to the greater world, these seeds are planted, but the environment it's in affected how it grew. Evolution and creationism aren't necessarily contradictory. It helped them they could see and bridge the gap between that the two could coexist.
Yeah. And so that's how you've helped them sort of see the coexisting potential since then. Amy, thank you for sharing that. Dr. Rokas, is this what you're talking about, where there is a way to hold both things in your hands?
Exactly. So if you start by acknowledging that science speaks about the realm of the natural phenomenon, and religion speaks about the realm of faith, then suddenly you have it's a false choice to have to choose between the two of them.
And I think it's also important to bring up that the theory of evolution versus creation has a lot to do with how we perceive ourselves. So, for example, are we going to see ourselves as specially created beings that have been given dominion over planet Earth, or are we going to see ourselves as part of a natural process and we're in a system that has rules we must obey? And I think that's a very important distinction to make.
Well, Mr. Roberts, you had a great effect on your class, not just Sophie here, because Catherine, who was in your class, graduated in 2011, couldn't stay on the phone line, but said she wanted to say she was fond and has vivid memories of learning about the Scopes trial, and was glad that you were her teacher. So,
well, thank you very much, Catherine. I think I know which Catherine this is too.
Yeah. Well, Sophie, when you were, we've been talking about the Scopes trial. To be honest, I don't know how much of it I was taught when I was in high school, but the facts that we're talking about today, are those things that are vivid in your mind as well after all the way back to high school?
Yes, because we made it fun.
Yeah.
Mr. Roberts made it fun, and we got to be creative, and we got to be silly and use voices and have this production to learn about it. And it felt very silly at the time because, it's a class of 15, 14-year-old boys and girls.
Silly because you were acting.
Silly because we were acting.
Got
and then
it.
Also even kind of a little bit silly that to look back on, like, we're having this big production about science, and it kind of feels a little bit familiar today of we're getting very up in arms over just things that are very evidence-based.
And yet very deeply held beliefs. And let's go back to the phones. Steve from Lebanon, you're on This Is Nashville.
Hello.
What would you like to share, Steve?
Well, I believe in science, and I believe in creation. And I picked up some of the discussion while I was on hold, and it seems to be going in the right direction. My thought is basically that God made everything. God gave stuff age. Adam, when he was created, was a man. All the scientific evidence would say that he had grown from a baby. So why couldn't God have created the earth and given it age with evidence, because he created all of the laws of nature, right? So he could create fossils, he could create whatever he wanted. So the Earth has evidence of age. So science reveals that age as God created it. So to me, they're not really in conflict. You just have to come from the perspective of, yes, science is just discovering or making known the evidence that God put into place, that the Earth has evidence of being older than it really is.
Steve, has your view on the Bible as an explanation of where it all comes from and sort of using that as an explanation, has that evolved over time?
Well, I mean, that concept that I just described, I haven't always had. I never really thought too much about the evolution of my thoughts. So yeah, I don't know how to answer that.
Fair enough. Steve, thank you so much for sharing. And Dr. Rokas, when you've got someone who is, obviously Steve is much more on that sort of creationist end of this spectrum. Are they kind of welcome in the auditorium, when you're talking about the Scopes trial?
Yes, of course. Everybody's welcome. I think it depends, right, on sort of, how you interpret the data. And so if I understand correctly Steve's arguments, my response would be, why would a creator put so much disease on this planet?
Wow.
Why would you have, kids dying of horrible diseases, or, even, just a standard process like pregnancy and delivery, 4%, death rate in pre-medical societies.
It is a great mystery to us all. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think we've got time for one more phone call. So we'll go to Oakley, who's in Cookeville. You're on This Is Nashville.
Hello, how's it going? Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, what you have to say?
I was just wondering if he might have seen the book. I think it was written by one of my tech professors, Dr. George Webb.
Tech as in Tennessee Tech?
Yeah, as in Tennessee Tech, yeah. And he wrote a pretty interesting book, and I heard him talking about it about a month ago or so on one of the local radio stations about the Scopes monkey trial. He's a history professor, so he had kind of interesting history take on it, and going into a lot of detail about how the trial came about. And I was just wondering if you guys had seen that, and I'm not so sure when the book was produced, but just thought it was maybe a curious question.
Yeah, Oakley, thanks for that question. Wesley Roberts, I'm a little surprised that you haven't written a book yet. You sound like you're headed that direction.
Well, I'm still reading all the books that I can on the Scopes trial, and there are hundreds of them.
Really?
And I would also like to share, circling back to Sophie's experience, and that is that I became so obsessed with the Scopes trial that I did write the play that students acted out using the transcripts. And what I did was I condensed the last 2 days. And if anyone would like to see that, then I have a special email account set up. It's scopesteacher@gmail.com. And if you will email me, then I will be glad to send you a link to that script.
And that's primarily for teachers to use as a classroom.
Yes, it does include a lesson plan, but it is also an easier read than the whole transcript book, which is about 600 pages. So I would highly recommend starting with this.
Very good. Dr. Rokas, I'm thinking of folks who might be listening in and feel like, you know what, I was really not taught about evolution. Obviously, that's a big word that includes many things. What would be a good place to start?
There are several popular science books. I would say one of my favorites, all-time favorites, is a book called The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins. And it's just a wonderful exposition of the depths and strengths of evolutionary biology.
Yeah. Sophie, have you, since being in Mr. Roberts' class, has this come back to you? Have you continued any studies?
Yeah, I would say my science-specific studies have continued just throughout my schooling.
Yeah.
I think we have quite a duty to continue to learn as we go throughout our lives and just stay educated. I think the biggest impact that learning about evolution had on me was just it opened my mind of being curious about what I don't know. So just wanting to, this makes sense. What else do I not know? So just having that hunger for learning and just being very curious.
Well, we know that listeners to This Is Nashville are curious people, and I hope that they have enjoyed this hour as much as I have, because this wraps our radio symposium on the Scopes trial that turns 100 years old this summer, but the debate's alive and well. Sophie Badgett, Wesley Roberts, and Tonis Rokas, thank you for joining us on This Is Nashville.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Now to the credits. This is Nashville. It's a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Mary Mancini. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Limley. Our board operator is Liv Lombardi, and answering the phones, Josh Deepen. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. Special thanks to our not ready for drive time radio players, Justin Barney and Jason Moon Wilkins. And if you missed that dramatic reading, you have to go back and listen to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. This is Nashville. I'm Blake Farmer. Go in peace.